Good evening, friends. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. And tonight, I'm going to share some thoughts with you here from the book of Ruth. It's been quite some time since I have actually spoke on this subject. In fact, I think it's been about 8 years since I have actually publicly spoke on the book of Ruth. But I'm doing this because, for one, I know that there is a lot of ministers that when they teach on the book of Ruth, the story of Naomi, Ruth, Boaz as the near kinsman, this is often used to type that the Gentiles are grafted into Israel. This is what we often hear, that the Gentiles, the story of Boaz is a type of grafting the Gentile into the Gentiles into Israel itself, and therefore we should be more subservient to Jewish tradition. But that's really not what the story of Boaz tells us. In fact, there's many Christians also that know that Boaz is a type of Christ. And so when we really begin to look at this story from that aspect, we can really glean some amazing insights from this. But speaking about being grafted in the first place, those of you that remember, what did Jesus say here in John 15? This is the Gospel of John chapter 15. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. Now you are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you. And the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can you, except you abide in me. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. All right, and we'll just kind of stop right there. And just as a reminder, as Paul taught in the book of Romans about the olive tree, you have to remember Jesus Christ is the olive tree. He is the root of the tree. He is everything. But watch what it says here in Romans. Paul says here in verse 17, if some of the branches be broken off, thou being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and fatness of the olive tree. Boast not against the branches, but if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. Or in this case, you could say the vine. And isn't it interesting? If Jesus is the vine, and we are the branches, think about it. Then Israel was actually grafted into, or actually were born from Christ, but they were taken out because of unbelief. And Gentiles were grafted in because of their faith in Christ. See, go on and read what it says. Verse 19, thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well, because of unbelief they were broken off. In other words, they weren't just broken off because he wanted to graft in the Gentiles. They were broken off because of unbelief. And as we continue in verse 20, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Okay? There you go, right there. So Christ is the vine. We are the branches. We're grafted into Jesus Christ. All right? Now, let's take that and keep that in mind. And now let's look at the story in Ruth. And let's read here, starting with chapter 2. And we're going to just kind of skim through this. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of valor, the family of Elimelech. And his name was Boaz. I think that's an interesting name in itself, Elimelech. By the way, I wish I could flip the camera around so I could talk to you face to face, but unfortunately, unless I'm doing it live, it doesn't allow me to flip the camera. But anyway, continuing on. Elimelech right here, that literally means, my God is king. I think that's fitting that Boaz comes from this family name of Elimelech. because truly Jesus Christ is king, and he is not just any king. He is El Gibor. He is the mighty God. And Boaz, what does his name mean to begin with? A coming goat. Literally. I mean, you could also say strong, in strength, you could translate it that way as well. Boaz, but Bo is to come, and Az is a goat. So it's like the coming sacrifice almost. And the Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Let me now go to the field and glean among the ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said unto her, Go, my daughter. Now, I find it interesting, too, if you think about it, that Naomi never mentions the fact that there's a more near kinsman than that of Boaz. Maybe it's because she's been gone for a long time from the homeland, and her family has all died off, as we know the story begins out. But nonetheless, I guess it's her assumption that Boaz is that nearest of kinsmen, but he's actually not going to be the nearest of kinsmen, and that's very important in what we're going to read here. So let's drop down to verse 4. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto the reapers, which also is interesting, he is from Bethlehem, the house of God's bread, same place that Jesus Christ would be born in. And of course, as a descendant of Boaz, because Boaz is the grandfather of David, and David, the son of David, would be Jesus Christ. But he goes on to say, And he said unto the reapers, The Lord be with you. And they answered him, The Lord bless you. Now literally, he doesn't say, The Lord be with you. He just says, Yehovah imchem. God with you. I think that's fitting as well, because what was Jesus to be called according to Isaiah 7, verse 14? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive. They give it there, but if you look in the Septuagint, it is virgin, bitula. It's from bitula, not from alma. Shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. God with you. Or God with us. Isn't that interesting? God with us. That's another place we can find that too, is in Zechariah 8, when they said that we will go with you, for we have heard, Kishamanu Elohim imchem. God is with you, in the plural, like Emmanuel, God with us. Very interesting how all these things kind of run hand in hand there. Let's go back to chapter 2. We continue on down, and verse 5, Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers, Whose damsel is this? Because, of course, as we know the story, we have that Ruth has come to glean in the field. And it says, And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, It is a Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the field of Moab. So now he knows it's a Gentile girl. And she said, Let me glean, I pray you, and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and hath continued even from the morning until now, save that she tarried a little in the house. Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither pass from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch you? And when you are athirst, go into the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn. Isn't it interesting? Even Boaz is the one that is giving her to drink. Even though it's by the hand of his man, he still is the one that has commanded her to be able to drink. Jesus Christ said to the woman at the well, if you knew who it was, that asketh thee of the drink, you would ask of him, and he would give you living waters. Remember that beautiful passage? So there you are. There's your type right there. Then she fell on her face and bowed down to the ground and said unto him, Why have I found favor in thy sight, that thou shouldest take cognizance of me, seeing I am a foreigner? Ve'anochi nachariah. I am a foreigner. A Gentile, in other words. And Boaz answered and said unto her, It hath fully been told me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thy husband. Think about it. The love that she had shown her. Because you got to remember, her mother-in-law was considered a Jew. There wasn't many people that took very much favor of them. But let's continue on and see what happens here. And how thou hast left thy father and thy mother in the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people that thou knowest not heretofore. The Lord recompense thy work, and be thy reward complete from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to take refuge. All right? But watch, though, there's some very key things that I think a lot of people overlook. Then she said, Let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord, for thou hast comforted me, and for thou hast spoken to the heart of thy handmaid, though I be not as one of thy handmaids. And Boaz said unto her at mealtime, Come hither, and eat of the bread. And dip thy morsel in the vinegar. Now, that's fascinating to me right there. Dip thy morsel into the vinegar. What is she a type of right here? See, if you remember, when the 12 apostles came to Jesus and they had the Passover meal, they were dipping the bread and they were having the wine. We know they were dipping the bread because Jesus said about Judas, the one that dips his bread with me, the same will betray me. So they were dipping it into something another, and maybe it was vinegar, just as we see here. Don't really know the answer to that. But again, it shows a type that the Gentiles would actually partake of the same gospel that Jesus Christ had also given to Israel originally. And she sat beside the reapers, and they reached her parched corn, and she did eat and was satisfied, and left thereof. And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and put her not to shame. And also pull out some of her of a purpose from the bundles, and leave it, and let her glean, and rebuke her not. You see, when you're taking of the grain, the wheat, that also represents the Word of God. And she, even as a woman, was not to be rebuked. See, there's so many types and shadows that's laying here. Not to mention the Word of God also being the fact that she could be a partaker of the same Word of God. And the fact that we could look at this as well. So we go further down, we get to verse 19. And we see, and her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today, and where wrougest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she told her mother-in-law in whom she had wrought, and said, The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. All right. Now, before that happens, though, she comes back to her mother-in-law, and she saw that she'd been gleaning, and she brought forth and gave to her that which she had left, and afterwards she was satisfied. Who's the one feeding who, though? That's what's really important to take note of right here. Verse 18. Who was feeding who? The Gentile daughter, Ruth, the Moabitess, was bringing to Naomi, the Jewish woman, the bread of life. It wasn't the other way around. You see, so what does that tell us as believers today? As Christians, we are the ones that Boaz has taken. In other words, Christ has taken notice of the Gentiles. And as a result, it is our duty to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ, the bread of life, unto the Jewish people. It's not that you're to be sitting under the tutorage of Talmudic Judaism, learning something, but rather through the grace that has been shown through Jesus Christ, we are to share with Naomi, who has suffered such great losses She lost her husband, lost her sons, lost everything. Now, let's continue on. And Ruth the Moabitess said, Yea, he said unto me, Thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest. Naomi said unto Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, and that thou be not met in any other field. So she kept the fast by the maidens of Boaz, and gleaned until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And she dwelt with her mother-in-law. All right, now let's move over to Ruth chapter 3, though. And there's a couple other things I want to share with you here, and a little bit in chapter 4 as well. But when we look here in chapter 3, verse 2, let's see. No, let me start with verse 1. And Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with you? And now is there not Boaz our kinsman, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get you down unto the threshing floor. But make not yourself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. And she said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me, I will do. Now we know the story, what happens. She goes there, and of course, Boaz, he's surprised to find Ruth at his feet. And this conversation picks up here in verse 9, and he said, Who art thou? And she answered and said, I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thy handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. And he said, Blessed be the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast shown more kindness in the end than at the beginning, insomuch as thou didst not follow the young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do unto thee all that thou sayest. For all the men in the gate of my people do know that thou art a virtuous woman. Now, even though she's a Gentile, she's known as a virtuous woman. And he says here, And now it is true that I am a near kinsman, howbeit there is a kinsman nearer than I. This is where it gets really interesting. So he tells her, Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning, that if he will perform unto thee the part of the kinsman well, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he be not willing to do the part of the kinsman to thee, then will I do the part of the kinsman to thee, as the Lord liveth. Lie down unto the morning. And she lay at his feet into the morning, and she rose up before one could discern another, for he said, Let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. Right? And she goes out. Now, again, he won't let her go out empty, or go empty to her mother-in-law. Watch this here. Verse 16, we begin with it. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, How art thou, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done to her. And she said, These 6 measures of barley gave he me, for he said to me, Go not empty unto thy mother-in-law. Again, remember, Boaz is a type of Christ. And every time he sends Ruth back to Naomi, who's the Jewish woman, represents the people of Israel, she wasn't to go back empty. Always to bring the bread of life. Always to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is why it's so important that we always bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to the Jewish people. Because it's our responsibility. Then said she, Sit still, my daughter, until thou know how the matter will fall, for the man will not rest until he has finished the thing this day. Now, when we jump over here to chapter 4, this is what I also find interesting. Watch what happens here. Boaz went up to the gate and sat him down there, and behold, there the near kinsman whom Boaz spoke came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city, and said, Sit ye down here. And they sat down. And interesting, 10 men as witnesses. And he said unto the near kinsman, Naomi, this is that has come back out of the field of Moab, sell up the parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to disclose it unto thee, saying, buy it before them that sit here, and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if it will not be redeemed, then tell me, that I may know. For there is none to redeem it besides you, and I am after you. And he said, I will redeem it. All right. Now, the guy, in other words, the kinsman that was nearer than Boaz, he's willing to redeem it until this one little matter is disclosed. In the blue, right here, verse 5, then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, hast thou also bought of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. What does he say in verse 6? And the near kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Are you serious? He can't do it, except that he would mar his own inheritance. In other words, he couldn't dare have a Gentile coming into his household. This is why the gospel has to be brought to the Jewish people by a Gentile. Because until this day, that spirit of blindness still is upon the eyes of Israel. And they still look down upon the Gentiles as nothing more than servants. Nothing more than someone that mars the inheritance. You know how you know this? Because the state of Israel has now declared that Israel shall be a Jewish state, and anybody that is a non-Jew cannot be a citizen of Israel. And they're even talking about revoking the citizenships of Palestinians and anybody that is a Christian. Why? Because in the sight of Israel, they cannot redeem Naomi because Naomi is attached to Ruth the Moabitess, a Gentile. Isn't that interesting? But you know who's the more righteous is Naomi. And Naomi is a type of the believer of Israel who does have a Gentile daughter and has not denied her daughter, even though she's a Gentile. He goes on to say, though, in verse 6, take thou my right of redemption on thee, for I cannot redeem it. Now, this was a custom in former time concerning redeeming and concerning exchanging. To confirm all things, a man drew off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor. And this was the attestation in Israel. So the near kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thyself. And he drew off his shoe. And Boaz said unto the elders and to all the people, you are witnesses this day. I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's in the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I acquired to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among the brethren among the gate of his place. You are witnesses this day. And all the people that were at the gate of the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is come into thy house like Rachel, and Leah, which two did build the house of Israel, and do thou worthily in Ephrath, and famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore unto Judah, and the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. See, look at that. The seed that the Lord shall give to this young woman. There's the prophecy right there. The seed was going to pass down through her. The Zerah, right there, will come through this Moabite woman. Why? Because she believed God. Faith. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and she went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. And that son was Jesse, by the way. And Jesse begot David. Let his name be famous in Israel, as it was said. Verse 15, and he shall be unto thee a restorer of life and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, who loveth thee, who is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. How true that was. You see, friends, the story of Ruth, Boaz as the kinsman redeemer, is a type of Christ. And it's not a story of being grafted into Israel, but it's a story of being grafted into Christ. It is a story of Christ redeeming the Gentile bride that was rejected by Israel. See, the nearer kinsman, who was Israel itself, rejected the Gentile because she was a Gentile. But she became the bearer of the seed. And as we see over and over in the story, it is also Ruth, the Moabitess, that brought the bread of life to Naomi, the Israelite who had become barren. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. I trust this little message has been a blessing to you. Good evening. And by the way, do keep in mind, if these messages do bless you, consider supporting the work we do here. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can visit our website, israelinewslive.org, and that'll take you right here to our page there. And there's a little place here to the right you can click on where you can donate right there online, or you could take and just go by mail, whether it be Ben-Nun Institute or Stephen Ben-Nun. And our mailing address, 8297 Champions Gate Boulevard, pound 442, Champions Gate, Florida, 33896. Thank you, and blessings to you for your kindness and love. Good evening.